Hello there, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I am going to be doing some watercoloring. So let me talk a little bit about what I'm using. I'm going to use my Daniel Smith watercolors. I'm also using this freshwater rinse well. This thing is awesome because I'm not real good at trying to keep my water clean, having two different bowls. So this is great because you just press that button. It releases new water from the tub, and then the rest of it goes down below. And I am also painting the Suzy Plantamura Suzy's Sweet Treats. These are cards that come from Simon Says Stamp. They have about 15 in the shop right now that I have noticed. And I can link to that page down below. And I'll link to these specifically down below. But I am just going to watercolor one of them. I will show you all of them finished at the end because it's something I've been working on over a period of time. But we're just going to talk a little bit about the watercoloring, what I'm using, and those sorts of things. Right now I'm just putting down a wash of color. Like I said, these are my Daniel Smith watercolors. These were a split, basically. So I have a split group, a group of friends that I split with. I know some of the ladies, some I don't. And the lady that heads it up is actually somebody that I know and have known for years. And so I didn't buy all these tubes. That would have been expensive. So instead I bought two of the splits. And you can find all kinds of Daniel Smith watercolor splits on Etsy. And so that's a great place to find if you're looking specifically. I didn't get to pick out my colors. I just decided on the two splits that I wanted, and it came with all these colors. I started off with buff titanium. That is the main color that I put down. I like to start with a wash of color because I work in layers, and watercolor actually just works better in layers. And it's one of those things that, you definitely have to practice working with and using. And I tend to not to use a lot of water when I do watercolor. So I am using a number 4. This is a silver black velvet watercolor brush. And so it's not a big watercolor brush. It's not the smallest, of course, but it's not a big one. And the second color that I've grabbed is raw sienna. And I'm adding my second layer where I believe that shadowing would be. And I don't really have any rhyme or reason to how I pick my shadowing. It seems typical that I would allow my light source, for me anyway, to come from the upper right-hand side. I just tend to always go that way. I'm not sure why I do. I just do. And if I ever switch it up, it's not something that I've intended. It just happens that way. So like I said, my light source is coming from the upper right hand side, and I am painting these chocolate chip cookies in layers, and I'm still working there with the raw sienna color. Somebody had asked me how I pick my colors, and as I said, I didn't pick these specific colors. I just chose a split, and this split came with these colors. And so I'll just talk about the colors that I'm using. I won't talk about all the colors in this palette. The palette itself is called the Medine watercolor tray, and I'll link that down below as well. And actually, that particular watercolor tray comes with these metal holders or hinges, and I just pulled those out because from what I had read and from what I understood, those rusted over time if you tend to use a lot of water, and I didn't want to risk that. So I just went ahead and yanked those out with pliers, and I am keeping my pans in there, my little splits, in there with some like a tacky, not glue, but more like do you remember when you were younger and you had this tacky stuff that you'd put posters up on the wall with? Well, that's sort of the same thing. And this is my Elmer's, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but I will have it listed down below as well. Now I am working with the chocolate chips. So as of now, I only put down 2 colors on my cookies. Typically I like to work with 3 colors, but I've put only 2 down. And so for the next color that I'm using for my chips is the burnt umber. And it's not the darkest brown because I do plan to do a little bit of shadowing on there. And I will only use 2 colors on these as well because the chocolate chips are so small. And the trick with shadowing or anything like that is sort of to trick the eye into thinking that there is a shadow there. Which is why, obviously, I'm not perfect. I am not super proficient in watercolor or really any medium that I use. I wouldn't consider myself a pro on any of it. I just like the mediums, and I will use them. So Copics and watercolor are the ones that I use the most. And Copics, just like watercolor in the sense that, for me anyway, it works better in layers. And I like to start with a wash. So that's the same thing I'm doing with my chocolate chips. I'm putting a wash down of my burnt umber. And then I'm going to kind of let that dry a little bit. Now I'm going to move in with a darker color. This is the Dyck Brown. And this is the color that I chose to use for my darkest shadow on my cookie. So I wanted to make sure that I had it kind of diluted. And so I have pulled some of that into my pan and added a lot of water to it, because the color itself would have been a little bit dark if it had been just full strength. I will say I am not great at mixing colors because I tend not to mix enough, and that's frustrating for me. You know, if you're watercoloring a big area and you don't put down enough color, you don't mix enough color, for me it's hard to mix that same color again. So this is why I tend to, at least me, and once I get a little better I won't do it as much, but this is why I tend to go right for a specific color. So if I could afford it, I would have all of the pans of Daniel Smith watercolor if I could, because I really do enjoy these watercolor. They're definitely on the pricey side, which is why I chose to do splits. And from there, if I decide there are colors that I like better than others, then I might buy the actual tubes to replace. But for now, this just works out really well. And so I'll just keep going with my third layer of color. And as you can see, I've just built that color up, starting with that buff titanium, second color of raw sienna, and then moving on to that Dyck Brown. I just added up 3 layers of color to get my shadowing. And I sort of use a little bit of a stippling effect sometimes, because in some instances I don't mind the harsh lines, but in other instances I don't want it to be as harsh. And I did not write down this color. This is my darkest brown, and this is the second color that I'm using on my chocolate chips. I wanted my chocolate chips to dry just a little bit before I started bringing in that darker, deeper brown. And you will see that what I'm doing actually is I'm not even going back to my palette. I grabbed so much of that brown for the first few chips that in order to color the chips down below, I'm just going right back up to those first few chips and grabbing the color from there. And that's actually working out just fine. These watercolor papers, or cards, I guess is what you'd call them. These Suzy Plantamura watercolor cards are done on Ranger's watercolor paper. And it's the exact same size as the card front, so it is 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. You can trim these down if you want, and I have done that in the past because this is not the first watercolor video that I have done using Suzy Plantamura's watercolor cards. I can link that one down below if that's something that you're interested in watching. Now that I'm done with the cookies, I am going to start coloring in the tablecloth or whatever's underneath the cookies. And for this, I don't have a specific color that I can tell you that I use because this was a mix on my palette and I wanted to use it up. So I am just coloring in those hash lines with that color that came from my palette. And I will use that color again on the word love, but I just wanted to get some of that color down. Now I've decided to go back in and obviously need to put some shadowing underneath those cookies so they don't just look like they are just sitting there. So instead of using another brown, I decided to use the color Moon Glow, which is a purple. It's more of a gray purple in my opinion. And I love how it looks. So this is one of those instances where you can grab another color that you might not typically grab, like a purple, and you start to use that for your shadowing or something along those lines. And I really love the way that purple shadow looks underneath the cookies. It isn't maybe exactly 100% accurate if you were to see these cookies sitting on a table, but obviously they're not meant to look 100% real. Now I'll move on to painting love, and again, this color just comes from my palette. It was a mix of a pink and a red, just to see if I could get another color. And so I have said this before, at least in the other Suzy Plantamura watercolor card video that I made. I like to sit and watercolor these while my husband is playing video games. And this color that I'm using is called Quinacridone Purple. So I will sit and paint these while he is playing video games, so that way at least I feel like we're spending some time together. I haven't been doing as much painting because I have branched out and started doing a little bit more crochet. I've crocheted since I was about maybe 8. I've never been good at it, and I wouldn't even say I'm good at it now, but I have been sitting there doing that. I'm just making washcloths, just having fun sitting there doing that. And funny story, we have learned that by me sitting there crocheting, I am actually getting steps on my watch. It's killing my husband because he's like, "How are you getting so many steps?" And I'm like, I couldn't figure it out at first, but it turns out it's because I was crocheting. And so sometimes now when I'm sitting there crocheting, he'll say, "Oh, you're getting your steps in." I'm like, "Yeah, that's what I'm doing." So I have gone back to that Moon Glow Purple, and I am adding some shadowing on the bottom of my purple, word baked, and I am adding it very heavy, or fairly heavy down at the bottom, and then I will use a little bit of water to soften out those edges by using what I like to call a bit of a stippling effect. And I think that ends up looking pretty good, and I like the way that is. So I'm just about done here, and as a final bit, what I like to do with these is I like to do splatter. So I will grab some of that purple onto my paintbrush, and then I will use my finger and just flick that paint all over. I don't want it to be overwhelming, but I do want a little bit of a subtle speckles, as you can see. So now I'm going to show you what these look like, all my cards look like done. I have added a back to all of these, just a card base to the back of each of them. And now I have 12 finished cards. Some of these took a little bit more time than others. And like I said, I don't have video for them because I would just sit and watercolor while my husband was playing games. But I love doing this. It is such a stress reliever. It's so fun to just sit there and mix colors if you're good at that, or just paint. And so I love having finished cards at the end of it. So I would love to know what you guys think of these. If you have any questions about what I painted or how I painted it, you could leave those down in the comment section below. Do you guys ever use these Suzy Plantamura cards? Is it something that you guys enjoy? Is it something you guys might enjoy? I know that typically this is obviously a card making channel, so I didn't stamp any of these out, but I sure did paint them. So if you liked this video, hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. And as always, I do appreciate your love and support and all the nice comments you guys leave, and I do appreciate you stopping by. So thanks, guys.